All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Beautiful daf ahead of us today, beginning by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Sammy and Malka Esterson, for dedicating all the Siyum and Rothschilds this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak, Laib, ben Aharon, HaKohen, Sarah, Rachel, Bas, Baruch, Avraham, and Hinda, Bas, Henech, Efraim. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Michoel and Sarah Lipman, and family in honor of Phillip, Sanfield's Siyum HaShas, Mazal Tov. We thank Bill Eskin for dedicating the Week of Learning in honor of Chaim Rothschild. We thank again all of our sponsors for their generosity. And Abosai, with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Yud Aleph 11. Abosai, we are picking up on Yud Amud Beis. Beautiful Gemara ahead of us today. Altir Gizu Baderech. So Abosai, it's actually right across from Tosfos Altir Gezu. So remember again, the Gemara says as follows: Altir Gezu Baderech. So remember again, Yosef says to his brothers. Remember, this is in Parshas Vayigash. So remember again, after Yosef has revealed his identity to his brothers, he sends them back to Canaan to go ahead and get Yaakov, the rest of the mishpacha, and he gives them instructions. Altir Gezu Baderech. Now, literally, it means don't fight, right, or don't get angry on the way. So this is interesting. Yosef was telling his brothers, do not go ahead and get too involved in a dvar halacha and learning halacha. Why? Shematirgazu aleichem haderech, lest the road get angry upon you. Now, Bosa, what does that mean? Tirgazu aleichem haderech titu. So Bosa, what he was saying is you might get lost. You might get lost, right? So it's interesting. In the Rabbeinu Gershom, they changed the girsa. Not Rabbeinu Gershom, I'm sorry. In the Hagos v'tziyunim, Shema Tirgaz. So ultimately, Yosef was telling his brothers, listen, you have to go ahead and get back to Canaan. Don't start getting overly involved in halachic discussions, lest you get lost. Which I will say is such a profound yesod. Because what Yosef was telling to his brothers is, if you want to get from point A to point B in life, you must be focused. Do not allow yourself to get distracted. Sometimes you can get distracted with all the right things. In other words, again, it might be legitimately good things, beautiful things, wonderful things. But lamaisa, if they're going to distract you from getting from point A to point B, don't do it. Life is filled with distractions, many of them meaningful. But if you need to get to a desired location, do not allow yourself to fall prey to them. So the Gemara says, is that so that Yosef was telling his brothers not to learn on the way? If you have two Talmidei Chachamim who are walking on the road and they're not learning, Ru'uyin lisaref, they are fit ultimately again to be burned. Very strong lashon. Shneimar vayihema holchim. I'm sorry. V'hinei holchim. Gemara are recording the pasuk from Malachim Beis. V'hinei hema holchim haloch v'daber. V'hinei rechav eish v'susei eish. V'yafridu ben shnehem. V'yal Elio basar hashmayim. So just to give you the context, Elio and Elisha are walking, and this is the episode ultimately where Elio Hanavi is taken up to Shamayim, right, in the fiery chariot. So the Gemara makes an interesting observation here. The Gemara says, the only reason why Elisha was not burned, right? Why Elisha was not burned by the fiery chariot was because they were talking in halacha, haleka dibor. But if they weren't talking, ru'uyin lisaref, they would have been, right? Even Elisha would have been burned. To which the Gemara says, so how could Yosef tell his brothers not to engage in halacha? Lo kasha, hala migras, hala iyune. The Gemara says there's a difference about talking about something, we'll call it, on a general kind of superficial level versus going in depth. When you're going in depth, that's when you can get distracted. On a superficial conversation, of course, not only is that okay, but that is absolutely warranted. Meaning a Jew should never be totally distracted from learning. Rashi says over here, hala migras mi baile ba'archa. So to learn, but in a general kind of not too deep, superficial way, that's good on the road. Aval b'milsa, but something that requires incredible intention, that one should not do. So we'll say an incredible musar haskil. In other words, so in life, to get from point A to point B, most times in life, you can't have absolute focus. In other words, it's rare in life that you only have the luxury of focusing on one thing. Often you have to focus on many things, but make sure that if the goal is to get from point A to point B, that the other things you're focusing on during the journey will not be the kind of things that will distract you from getting to your desired location. Because they're both say, isn't it Maasim B'chol Yom, that we begin on important journeys in life, and then what happens? We get distracted with things, and often we get distracted with important things, and we never make it to the desired location. If you need to get somewhere in life, laser focus. You might have to look at other things, deal with other things, but don't allow yourself to get derailed. Incredible. We'll say elsewhere we learned that when Yosef said to his brothers, Altir Gezu Baderach, he was telling them, do not walk with an arrogant step. Don't walk with an arrogant step. Ultimately, again, I will say, literally it means, and go enter into the city while the sun is still out. What does this mean? What does it mean? Yosef tells his brothers, do not walk with an arrogant stride. We'll say, walking with an arrogant step ultimately goes ahead and removes 1/500th of a person's eyesight. The idea being that, we'll say what that means is, what's the pshat that walking with arrogance removes your eyesight? We'll say it's very clear. Arrogance is a blinding midah, right? When a person is arrogant, they don't see certain things in life. If I'm arrogant, I don't see my own shortcomings. I don't see my own mistakes. I don't see my own missteps. I often can't even appreciate people for who they are. That's what Chazal means when they say, if you walk with arrogance, you take 1/500. 1/500 means some chelik, right? Arrogance removes some level of vision from a person. So Yosef was telling his brothers, do not walk with an arrogant step. I will say, what does this mean? We'll say a person should only set out on a journey. What does it mean, bechitov? You should set out on a journey when the sun comes up, when it's light, and you should enter into your lodgings at night while the sun is still up as well. In other words, journeying should take place while it's light outside. Shene Emar, and that's what it means, bechitov, Rashi says, sheyamtin at sheyir kimo, vayar elokim esa ar kitov. That's what it means. Set out on your journey, kitov. Enter in from your journey, kitov. Kitov, a reference to Hashem saw the light, and it was good. Shene Amar haboker ar v'hanashim shulchu. Rabbi say again, story from Yosef. Haboker ar, the dawn dawned, or the dawn became light, and Yosef sent the men back to Canaan. So I will say, so this is just an alternate version of Altir Gezu Baderach. So ultimately, again, you begin to see three different interpretations what Yosef was saying Altir Gezu Baderach. Number one, Altir Gezu, don't get too involved in a Dvar Halacha lest you get distracted. Number two, don't walk with an arrogant stride. And number three, ultimately, again, make sure you leave when it's light and enter into your lodgings. And I will say, of course, Rashi quotes the Pashup Pshat. What's the Pashup Pshat? Yosef was afraid that what is it now? Altir Gezu Baderach literally means don't get angry, don't get upset. What Yosef was most concerned about is, on the way home, what's going to happen? Their brothers are going to get into an argument. What are they going to get into an argument about? Whose fault it was that they sold Yosef to begin with. So Yosef says, don't fight. Whatever happened. Chash Baruch Hu has a plan, get home. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Chia, Hamahalich Baderach. So listen to this about beautiful Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Chia. If someone is traveling, Al yochal yoser mishnei ra'avon. You should not eat more than what you would normally consume in a time of famine when you are traveling. So we'll say what Rabbi Yehuda says in Rabbi Chia sounds like he's saying over here that so when you're traveling, you should go ahead and diminish your food intake. Eat whatever you would eat in a time of famine. Okay, why is this? My timer. So we'll say two different interpretations. One interpretation is because since you're traveling, if you eat a lot, you're gonna have stomach issues, right? Literally, Mishum Ma'ayon Rashi says, "Shlo yischalchulu meyav shel adam berov achilas u'mnei Torah haderech." So I'll say ultimately against that your kishkas, don't get all. In a difficult situation because of the food moving around because of your journey. So the Gemara understands, since when you're journeying, you're moving, if there's a lot of food sitting in your kishkas, you're gonna have stomach issues. Okay, so the Gemara says, Mishum Marava and Mishum Mizoni. In Eretz Yisrael, they said for a different reason. Because if you're traveling, you need to make sure you have ample supplies. And because you need to have ample supplies, maybe you won't be able to access food during your journey. So essentially, take care of your food reserves. Don't eat a lot at any particular time, but save your food for the duration of the journey. My ben Arbos, what's the practical difference between these two approaches? Igo benayu, top of your aleph, the yasiv va'arba. So a good nafkamina would be, you're traveling by boat. So if I'm traveling by boat, I am not physically moving. So if it's an issue of the food sitting in my kishkas and moving around and getting sick, that really doesn't apply by boat. But if it's an issue of having ample reserves, right, for the duration of my journey, that applies by boat as well. Inami, de ka'azal me avna li avna. The other possibility, I will say, is where I'm traveling, there's a number of inns along the way. So because there's a number of inns, therefore again, I have constant access to food. So again, if it's an access of having enough food for the duration of the journey, I have enough food. But if it's an issue, ultimately, again, of the food sitting in my kishkas and moving around and getting sick, that would still apply. Incredible. So the Gemara goes, Rav Papa called parsa achel chadarifta. Rav Papa would eat a loaf of bread every parsa, which I will say was a lot to eat. If you look at Rashi says over achel rifta, kasav Rav Papa had amra bana lo lechal tfei mishum mayana v'iu lo mistafi mimayana. So what it says is Rav Papa felt the reason why Chazal told us to generally reduce our intake when traveling was because of stomach issues. Rav Papa wasn't concerned about stomach issues. Why not? The Baal Beten Hava. Interesting term, right? He was a Baal Beten, right? He was a zaftig individual, right? And therefore, again, so again, because he was a large man, and ultimately, again, he wasn't worried about the negative effect that food would have upon him. So he went ahead and he ate a loaf of bread every stop. So the Gemara says, Amrav Yehuda Amarav Kala Mariv Atzel B'Shnei Ra'avon Nitzlo Misa Mishuna. Both say an interesting Gemara. Whoever goes ahead and starves himself, Mariv Atzmo, goes ahead and starves himself in days of famine, which I will say means anyone who reduces his intake during a famine, even though he doesn't have to. Right, we're going to see this is what's happening over here. In other words, I have plenty of food. Baruch Hashem. I stored food, so I have plenty to eat, but nevertheless, I diminish my intake during a famine. Nitzal mimitza mishuna. Such a person ultimately again will be saved from a dramatic death. Rashi says misa mishuna meis becherev uberav v'chol misa she'ena bidei malach hamabes kederach kol adam al mitasam. So we'll say, so a person who reduces his food intake during a famine, even though again he may have enough to eat in a regular fashion, is saved from an unusual death. So it's interesting. Rashi says over here, what's an unusual death? Death by sword, death by famine. Now we'll say, what's a normal death? Malach hamaves in your bed. Malach hamaves in your bed. Which I will say is such an incredible yisod in life. That to be able to die in a normal fashion, right? To be able to die in a bed, right? Maybe from old age or from sickness. We'll say no one lives forever. No one lives forever. And sometimes you have to have Mazal Tov to HaKodesh Baruch Hu, even for being able to die a normal death. So in your bed with the Malach HaMaves, that's a good death, right? That's a normal death. So a person who goes ahead and reduces his intake during a famine is saved from unusual death and is zocha to a regular death. Shnei Amar quotes over here the pasuk from Iyov, Be'ra'av pad chamimaves u'mecha midei ra'av. So the Gemara says, Mei ra'av mi baile. Why does it say Be'ra'av pad chamimaves? Literally again, through famine, I have redeemed you from death. It should say, Mei ra'av, from famine I have redeemed you. Halakha, this is what it means to say, B'schar shemarev atzo b'shnei re'avon, nitzal mimisa mishuna. If a person goes ahead and reduces their intake during a famine, they are saved from unusual death. Now, we're going to see what's the pshat with this. This has to do with going ahead and being a kind of person who lives within the communal norms. So ultimately, again, this individual, right, has plenty of food. So it's a famine. He could eat to his heart's content, but he's actively choosing not to in order to exhibit proper empathy, compassion, and just normative behavior within the context of the greater community. Kadosh Baruch Hu considers that to be a Mila. What we're gonna amplify that in just a moment. So if you choose to be part of the community in times of distress, even though again you have the means, but you choose to live in accordance with the way that those around you are living, HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at that as an incredible zechus and saves a person from an unusual death. We'll build on that in just a moment. Amrei Shlakish. A person is not permitted to engage in marital relations during years of famine. Yosef had two sons, the Torah says, before the famine came. So we'll say, this is the same idea. Rashi says, we'll say, all of this is part of the idea. You need to be part of the community. You can't live on the periphery. You have to be part of the collective. So if the community is suffering because of famine, I have to partake in that suffering as well. Part of the personalistic partaking in that is in abstaining from marital relations. Yosef has his sons before the famine comes. So the Gemara gives a qualification to this. However, if someone doesn't yet have children, they are permitted to engage in marital relations because, again, that need to have children ultimately, again, allows them to, I will say, in that case, so the act of partaking in marital relations doesn't look like one is seeking pleasure, ignoring the realities happening around them, but rather, again, it's an understandable desire to want to build one's mishpacha. Beautiful. Tanra Banon. Both listen to this incredible Gemara. Bisman sheisal shuruyin b'tzar. Both when Klal Yisrael are in the midst of difficulty, upireish echad mehen, and one person separates himself from the collective. So we'll say, so we're talking about over here of a person who chooses not to be part of the community in a time of tsar. So what happens? The two malachim who normally accompany us. So we'll say, so again, it's also a beautiful idea. Every Jew is accompanied by two malachim, two angels, right? One on his right and one on his left. We most often learn about these malachim, or hear about these malachim by Shalom Aleichem Malachi Asharis Malachi Elyon. The Gemara Masechet Shabbos says when you come home on Shabbos, very important Gemara, when you come home on Shabbos, you are accompanied by two malachim. And what are those malachim looking at? They want to know what your house looks like on Shabbos. Right? Is the table set? Are the beds made? Is everyone dressed nicely? Is everyone getting along? That's the big one. Right? Is everyone getting along? Are people speaking nicely to each other? Is there a spirit of Shabbos in the home? That's what the malachim are looking for when I enter into the house. But those two malachim are not just with me on Shabbos. They're with me every single day. So when a person chooses to absent himself from the community, in a time of suffering, what do the malachim do? So manichin lo yadein al rosho. They place their hands on his head. Va'omrim ploni zeh shepiresh minat tzibor. This individual who went ahead and absented himself and removed himself from the tzibor, al yira b'nei chamas tzibor, should not go ahead and see the consolation of the tzibor. In other words, both say, if you don't participate in the tzaris, you don't get to see the Yeshua's v'nechamas. That's just the way that life works, right? It's like any relationship. If you don't participate and you're not present in the hard times, you don't get to share in the joy. Such an incredible and overwhelming yesod. So Tanya Idach was another brayso that supports this. Bizman shat tzibor sharoi b'tzar al yomar adubos. Listen to how profound this is. When Klal Yisrael, and by the way, the tzibor, by the way, means Klal Yisrael, but it also means your community, right? Siyum means the congregation. Whenever the unit that you are a part of is sharui b'tzar, ultimately, again, is in a state of difficulty, al yomar adam, a person can say, eilech lebeisi, I'll just go to my house, v'ochal v'eshtan, I'll eat and I'll drink, v'shalom alecha nafshi, and everything will be fine. As I said, this is such an incredible yesod. See, this is true any time you see suffering in the world in which you live. In other words, I don't mean in the world, but like sometimes a person sees suffering with their friends, or sometimes even a person sees suffering with a family member, or within their kehilla, and a person says, okay, so sad, but I have to go on with my life. And this is literally what they do. I go home, I drink, I eat, I live my life, and I kind of just absent myself. I divorce myself from what's happening to those people around me. So the Gemara says you're not allowed to do that. Vim osekin, and if you do that, alava kosov omer v'hine sason v'simcha harog bakar v'shachat son echal basar v'shasos yayin achal v'shasa ki machar namos. Right, a person adopts this mentality and they say, you know what? Let me just enjoy. Life is so short. Might as well enjoy today because tomorrow we die. I don't have time to participate in anyone else's sar. Maxi basri, what does it say afterwards? We'll say the second wide line. V'nigla ba'aznei Hashem tzavakos im yichupara avan azel lachem ad tumuson. So we'll say ultimately again. So the Gemara says over here, a person who doesn't participate, who doesn't feel in the tsar of those around them, ultimately again meets a premature end. Ad kan midas beinonim. And I will say again, this is at least the mid of the Beinonim. So this is bad, but it's not the worst. Avol, b'midas rishon maksiv, asayu ek chayayin, v'nisba'a sheichar, v'aya kayom k'zeh yom machar. Maksiv, I say, what does it say afterwards? V'atzadik avid ve'in ish sam alibo, ki mipnei hara nesaf atzadik. See, I will say, what the Gemara is highlighting over here is this incredible yisod, that a person is obligated to exhibit empathy and compassion. Empathy and compassion. And I will say, it's so incredibly important because it is so tempting when we see difficulty on us. I will say, you'd be surprised, by the way, how often this happens, even in marriage. Right? A spouse is undergoing a difficult time, and sometimes the other spouse says, you know what? Not my problem. They have to figure it out. And I will say, there is no more cruel indifference in life than seeing someone who's close to you suffer, and yet you absent yourself from that process. It happens in marriage. It happens with children. Children are struggling. And parents sometimes say, they'll figure it out. No, they're not going to figure it out. That's the job of a parent, to help their kids figure stuff out. Right? So the idea is, and again, in a tzibor, in Klal Yisrael, I have to tell you, I was speaking to someone yesterday, and in Eretz Yisrael, and they were telling me, can I call you back? I have to go to a levaya. So I said, who's levaya? So who's levaya? So he's going to the levaya of Elikei, Hashem Yikom Damo, right? The young man, the 26-year-old man who was killed in the old city. I said, did you know him? He said, no. I said, no. And I was like, that's what it means to be part of Klal Yisrael. The guy took off a day from work because he had to go to a levaya. You don't know. I mean, again, that's Klal Yisrael. You see this all the time, but it was such a striking thing. So I'll tell you the truth, the mussar that I took is, again, I watched the levaya. I said, you know what, if this guy's taking off a day from work to go to a levaya, I could take out an hour from my day. The levaya itself was dramatically inspiring. Both the Hespedim as well as the incredible singing that was happening. There was Mika Amcha Yisrael. So I will say, but yet, to be honest, like, how many of us, we heard the news, and then, like, we just went on. After all, it was Sunday, right? There's stuff to do on Sunday. So I've got plans, I've got things going on. How many of us, and I include myself in this, disrupted our activities of daily life because of a tragedy that happened in Klal Yisrael? Versus how many of us read an article, right, lamented a bit, and then nothing in my day changed. We're not allowed to live like that. Now, does it mean that I cancel my plans so they sit on the floor and do nothing? No, life always has to go on in some way. But the shaila is, how does the rhythm of my life change in some way? Maybe it's an extra kapitel of Tehillim. Maybe it's coming early to davening. Maybe it's learning an extra piece of Torah. Maybe it's giving a little more tzedakah. But how does my life change when I encounter the tsar of the tzibor? And the reality is, all too often, the Gemara is reflecting, it doesn't. I hear stuff. We're masters of cognitive dissonance. I hear it. I say, so sad. And then I move on. And the Gemara says, a Yid cannot live that way. When a Jew hears about suffering within Klal Yisrael, there has to be a reaction. It could be a small reaction. It could be an episodic reaction, a momentary reaction, but a reaction nevertheless. So incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Ela yitzar adam imatzibor. A person has to participate in the tsar of the tzibor, in the pain of the tzibor. Shekim matzina b'Moshe Rabbeinu, shetzir atzmo imatzibor. Moshe Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbeinu joined in the tzar of the tzibor. Shene Emar Videi Moshe Kvedim. We're both said by the war of Amalek, with Amalek. Sorry, both say remember again the famous war with Amalek. Moshe Rabbeinu, right when we came out of Mitzrayim, Moshe Rabbeinu sends Yoshua. Moshe Rabbeinu sits on the mountaintop, and again Moshe Rabbeinu raised his hands. When his hands were extended upright heavenward, Klal Yisrael would win. When his hands were downward, they would lose. It says the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Shemar Videi Moshe Kvedim. The Moshe Rabbeinu's hands were heavy, so what did they do? They placed the stone, and Moshe Rabbeinu sat on the stone. Why did Moshe have to sit on a stone? He didn't have a cushion, he didn't have a pillow, he didn't have a nice chair, right, to sit on. Why does he have to sit on a stone? Elakach Amar Moshe, Horil v'Yisrael Shuruyim b'tzar, Af ani eye imayim b'tzar. Moshe Rabbeinu said, how could I sit on a comfortable chair when Klal Yisrael is waging battle? If Klal Yisrael is bitzar, Klal Yisrael is fighting, they're in the middle of war, then I have to feel their tzar at least in some small way as well. And therefore he decided to sit on a stone. And whoever again goes ahead and joins in the tzar of the tzibor, zocha v'roa b'nechamas tzibor, ultimately again sees the consolation. I will say, isn't this the most beautiful bracha? See, essentially what it means is, if you're part of the team, you're part of the team. And the way ultimately again you demonstrate your part, your chelik, you're being part of the team, is by participating in the tzaros, feeling the tzaros of Klal Yisrael. And if you participate in the tzaros, then ultimately again you will be zocha to have a chilik in the simchas as well. V'shema yomer adam, mi meyedi. Person might say, okay, but who's going to know, right? Who's going to really know if I participate, right? If I feel the tzaros of Klal Yisrael or not? I was listen to this. Mi meyedi, avne beiso shel adam, the koros beiso shel adam me'idim bo. Shabbos says, this is incredible. The stones of my home and the beams of my home testify ultimately as to whether or not I'm the kind of person who participates in the tzaros of Klal Yisrael. Sheneh Emar ki even mekir tizak v'chapis me'etz ya'anena. So I will say, so what's the pshat with this? That the beams of my home, the stones of my home. See, I will say, what it means ultimately is that halacha l'maisa. See, two things. First of all, anyone could put a good show on, outside. The shaila is, what am I like inside my home? Am I the type of person ultimately who feels the tzaris and the simchas of Klal Yisrael in private circumstances as well, or just publicly? What it also is telling us is, let's say, one of the most important lessons that we have to provide our families, because the home represents family, is the notion of being part of the Am, of being part of Klal Yisrael, and what it means to be part of Klal Yisrael, a sense of achrayus, a sense of responsibility. That responsibility manifests itself in a variety of different ways. Responsibility is, number one, take ownership, do things. Do things in community. Don't wait for other people to do things. Don't think that something's going to get done through someone else, but do it. Be the kind of person who rolls up your sleeves and helps out, whether it's helping out in your shul, helping out in your tzibor, helping out in your kehilla, helping out in your community. Don't be a spectator, but ultimately, again, be a doer. That's a lesson that we teach our mishpachas about what it means to be ba'alei achrayus within Klal Yisrael, and including that achrayus is, how do you model for your family what it looks like to share in the pain of Klal Yisrael? Do you model for your family what it looks like to share in the simchas of Klal Yisrael? At the end of the day, the greatest testament to whether or not I share in the simchas of the tzaros of Klal Yisrael is what my home looks like. What my home looks like, what my mishpacha looks like. Do I raise ba'alei achrayus or not? It's my home that testifies whether or not I am truly participatory in Klal Yisrael or just a spectator. So the Gemara says, no, it's the two accompanying angels, right? The two malachim that always accompany me. They're the ones who testify about me after 120, whether or not I was a full participating member in Klal Yisrael. I shared in the tzaras and the simchas of Klal Yisrael. Shneimar ki malach yitzav alach. Reb Chidka Amar nishmaso shel adam hi me'id alav. This is beautiful. Reb Chidka says, "It's my neshama. I don't need my home, right? I don't need the malachim. My neshama itself testifies after 120 about the type of person I was. Right? Was I a Jew who just lived for myself, or was I a Klal Yisrael Jew?" And again, being a Klal Yisrael Jew means, number one, you participate You're not a spectator. You help, and you don't wait for others to do. You share in the tzaras, you share in the simchas. Shene'emar, atem eidain ne'um Hashem. Kel amuna ve'einav. So we'll say now the Gemara is going weiter, dashing another pasuk. What does it mean when we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a kel amuna? HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately again is a kel amuna ve'einav, right? Literally a God of amuna, a trustworthy God, and there is no iniquity. Kel amuna. So we'll say, listen to how credible this is. Kishim shenifran min harisham la'olam haba, afilu ala avera kala. Both say the same way that God is a trustworthy God, namely that in the afterlife HaKadosh Baruch Hu exacts retribution for every single avera from the Rishaim. Listen to this. Listen to this. Avera kala sha'osin kach nifran min hatzadikim ba'olam hazeh ala avera kala sha'osin. So we'll say, isn't this incredible? So the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu exacts retribution from the Rishaim for every single Avera in the afterlife, He exacts retribution for every single small Avera from the Tzaddikim in this world. So we'll say, the Gemara is operating off the theological premise that it is advantageous for Tzaddikim to get their judgment for their Averas in this world. That way, by the time the tzaddik comes to Olam Haba, the tzaddik is totally cleansed. So we'll say this is very important because Rashi points out this helps us to understand a little bit of the concept of tzaddik v'ralo. Why sometimes we see that the righteous suffer, and often it doesn't appear fair, but understand that sometimes the suffering of the righteous is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's way of cleansing them of their averos in this world. So the Gemara says, Eve'ein avel, there is no iniquity. What does that mean? Kishem shemesham schal tzadikim li'olam haba afila mitzvah kala she'osin. The same way that in the next one, the world to come, HaKadosh Baruch Hu repays the tzadikim for every mitzvah, even the smallest of mitzvos. Kach mesham schal rishayim ba'olam hazeh afila mitzvah kala she'osin. So too HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes ahead and rewards the rasha even for the smallest of mitzvos in this world. So I will say, this is the other side of the coin. This is why sometimes we see what? Rasha v'tovlo. So then you see wicked people prospering. Why? Because even the most wicked person has mitzvos. Right? Says there's no such thing as a person who doesn't have some mitzvos. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses to go ahead and give the Rasha his reward for his mitzvos in this world. Tzaddik v'yashar, who Rabbi say, get ready for this. What is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Is a tzaddik. He's righteous and yashar. Rabbi say, get ready. Amru, b'shaz piti raso shal adam lebeis olamo. Rabbi say, the time that a person dies or is getting ready to die, the Gemara says, Kol maisav niftarin, really it changes it to nifratan lefanav. So let's listen to this. After a person dies and they go before the Beis Din Shemal, they come before the heavenly court for judgment about the life that they lived. What happens? All of my actions appear before me. So we'll say, can you imagine this scene? Right? So a person leaves this world, all of my actions come before me in this world. So they're all standing before me. V'omrim lo, kach v'kach asisa b'makom ploni v'yom ploni. And we'll say, each of my actions come before me. And one by one they say, you remember me? You remember me? You remember you performed me in so-and-so place on so-and-so date? V'hu omer hin. And I say, yeah, I remember that. V'omrim lo chasom. And my actions tell me sign. In other words, I have to affirm that indeed I committed this action in this particular place, in this particular time. V'chosem. And I sign. Shene'emar biyad kol adam yachdom. V'lo, not only that, ela shematztik alav es hadin. I accept the judgment upon myself. V'omer lahem, and I say to the Beis Din Shalmala, Yafed dantuni. You've judged me appropriately. L'kaim ha'shenemar, l'man titztak b'davrecha. So we'll say, so the Gemara over here, I just want to point out, is specifically referring to chait. Right? The example they're giving over here is with Averos. That after 120, which is actually an overwhelming thought, that each of my Averos appear before me one by one. It's a long day, right? One by one, they show up in front of me and they say, you remember me? You remember me? You committed me, in this day, at this time, in this place. And I have to acknowledge it. I guess you have the right to dispute it, but it sounds like the Gemara says you can't really dispute it in front of the Beis Din Shalmala, like to dispute the claim, right? But, you're there, and I will say, I have to affirm each of them, yeah, did that, sign, and ultimately then I accept the fact that whatever the judgment of the Beis Din Shalmala is. Now the good news is, Baruch Hashem, if this happens for Averos, it means it also happens for what? For mitzvahs. So Baruch Hashem, it's not a one-sided thing. And the will say, of course, what the Gemara doesn't take into account over here is what? Tshuva. Tshuva. I'll say this is why it is so important for all of us to become Baalei Tshuva, to do Tshuva now for whatever it is that any outstanding matters we have. It's time to do Tshuva, not to wait till Elul, not to wait till Yom Noah, to do Tshuva now, because we never know how much time we have in this world and who wants to confront this. I do not want to stand in front of the Beis Din Shamala with every single event, going through every single day, having to acknowledge and not in my head, yes, I did it, yes, I did it, yes, I did it. I do not want that. And I've always said the beautiful part is we could avoid it. We can absolutely avoid it if we become true Baalei Tshuva. So again, it applies to mitzvahs. Don't have to undergo this process if we become true Baalei Tshuva. We should all be Zochem Meretz Hashem. Amar Shmuel, Kal Yoshe B'Taanis Nikrachot. I will say beautiful Gemara now. Whoever goes out and fasts is called a sinner. The act of, I will say this is voluntary fasting. The act of voluntary fasting as a form of penitence, ultimately again is sinful. This is Shmuel. Savra Kiyaitana. He holds the following Tana. Here we go. This is fascinating Gemara. Tisanya, Rebbe Lazar, Rebbe Omer, Ma Talmud Lomar V'chipar Lo Me'asher Chat Ala Nefesh. What does it mean when it says you should atone for him because he sinned? Now I will say, just to give you the context, the pasuk over that the Gemara is referencing is the pasuk by Nazir. Is the pasuk by Nazir. So the pasuk says he will atone for himself, for he went ahead and sinned regarding his soul. How did he sin regarding his soul? Rather, Rabbi say, what's the sin that Nazir committed? He voluntarily abstained from wine. Ein sin gedol mizo. Right? That's it. Right? Voluntarily abstained from wine. What's the matter with you? Valo, dvarim kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says it's a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Umazeh shelo tzir atzmo ela min hayayin nikra chote. Rabbi say, if you voluntarily abstain from wine, you're called a sinner. Hamitzar atzmo mikol davar v'davar alachas kama v'kama. So I'll say, this is incredible. This is Rabbi Lazar HaKafar's like hashkafas HaChaim. And this hashkafas HaChaim is, as a Jew, there is enough that is already usher. There's enough that's already usher. There's absolutely no need to deprive yourself of anything more. Not only that, the road to holiness is not paved through additional forms of privation. The road to holiness, ultimately, again, is paved. There's enough stuff you can't do. Become good in those areas, but to think that to go ahead, that the only way to become holy is to deprive yourself of things. I will say, now I want to be clear. The way to holiness is how? Is what? To deprive yourself of things, right? Let's be clear on that. That's Kedoshim Tiyu, right? Kedoshim Tiyu Kadesh es Atzim V'cha B'Mashem Mutralach. Right? The whole idea in life is restraint. Just because something is mutter doesn't mean you should do it. And in fact, Kedusha often is found in the realm of exercising proper shit. Like the Ramban says, are you allowed to eat meat and drink wine, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Can you do it? Absolutely. Only problem is it's called gluttonous. Right? It's called gluttonous. So what Rabbi Lazar HaKafer is pointing out over here, however, is going ahead and assering additional things, that's just not necessary. That's just not necessary, and that's not the form. That's not the way to kedusha. On the other hand, Rabbi Lazar Omer Nikra Kadosh. No, the Nazir is called Kadosh. He's called holy. Shene'emar Kadosh Yegadol Perero Sarosho. The pasuk says the growth of his hair will be Kadosh. And again, Rabbi Lazar will say, if this guy, the Nazir, who just abstained from one thing, wine, is called the Kaddish, one who abstains from additional things, how much holier he is. So I will say, so this is an incredible fundamental machlokes, right? In other words, I will say, so how do we view the Nazir? Rabbi Lazar HaKafer is saying the Nazir is a sinner. Because to go ahead and asr additional things which the Torah doesn't asr, there's absolutely no need for that, and that is not the path to personalistic holiness. Rabbi Lazar says, no, the ability to practice abstinence with things that are permitted, that is the pinnacle of holiness. So the Gemara says, Aylu Shmuel ha'ikri kadosh. What does Shmuel do with the fact that the Nazir is called the kadosh? No. Hahu agidol perakai. No. The Nazir is not called the kadosh. What's called kadosh? His hair. The growth of his hair has a sanctity. But according to Rabbi Lazar, what does it do with the fact that the Nazir is called the Chote? Hahu disayv nafshe. No. Rabbi Lazar will say, when is the Nazir a Chote? When the Nazir allows himself to become Tameh by being exposed to a corpse, that's when the Nazir is a Chote. Umi Amar Rabbi Lazar Hachid. But did Rabbi Lazar really say that the Nazir is a Kadosh? Rabbi Lazar says, Li olam yamud adam atzmo ki'ilu amud beis. Ki'ilu kadosh sharoi b'soch meyav Rabbi Elazar says a person, let's listen to this, should always view as if Kedusha is residing inside of his intestines. Now, what does that mean? Rabbi Elazar says a person should take care of their body. A person should take care of their body. A person should realize the body is a temple, the body is holy, and a person should always take care of their body. So the pashtos, based on that, Rabbi Elazar would not seem to be a big fan of additional forms of abstinence. Shneimar bekirbecha hakadosh v'lo avobir lo kashya had l'matzeh tzirei nafshe had l'matzeh tzirei nafshe. So Rabbi Elazar agrees, but it depends. Some people are capable of maintaining abstinence while still maintaining personalistic health, and other people are unable. Rabbi Elazar will say, if you could go ahead and deprive yourself of things while still maintaining a sense of physical health. Rashi says over here, Taanis, so remember again, we're going back now to the original statement. The original statement was, Shmuel said, ultimately again, that a person who fasts additionally is called a sinner. Rabbi Elazar was saying such a person is called kadosh. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar says you have to take care of your body. It's not a contradiction. There are some people who are able to engage in additional fasts, but are still able to maintain their physical health. If that's the case, then additional abstinence is called Kiddusha. But at the end of the day, if by additional fasting you're going to compromise your health, then not only is that not a mitzvah, but what? Ultimately, again, it is considered to be an Aveira. Incredible Gemara. So we'll say the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Reish Lakish Amar Nikra Chasid, Shenemar Gomel Nafshav Ish Chasid, Va'ocher Shero. So we'll say, listen to this. Reish Lakish says, such a person is called a Chasid, a person who goes ahead and maintains voluntary fast days, engages in additional fast, is called Chasid. So I just want to point out, again, what a profound and incredible, overwhelming machlokes this is, right? The kind of the launch point for the machlokes is by Nazir. How do you view the Nazir? Is the Nazir kadosh or is the Nazir a chote? Right? Is what he's doing good, not good? I'll point out to you, one second. If you hold the Nazir as a chote, this is very important. If you hold the Nazir as a sinner, then what's the Avi Shaila? Why does the Torah provide for this mechanism then? Because remember again, this goes back to the Gemara Masechta Sota. Remember we did Sota? Excellent. Remember again, the Gemara says Sota, right? Nazir is juxtaposed to the episode with Sota. Sota is the woman who is suspected of adultery. Why is Nazir juxtaposed with Sota? Remember? Because the Gemara says, Kol haroa Sota b'kalkula yazir atzma min hayayin. Because when you see, so I will say the assumption is, how do people get themselves into a Sota situation? Maybe a little too much to drink. So a person who sees, I will say, which in general is as an aside, just a commercial. And I will say, consumption of alcohol in mixed company is something that one truly has to avoid. I don't mean, again, a person has a Sudan Shabbos and a person is drinking wine, but social drinking in mixed company, I will say, should be something that really one has to be very, very, very careful about, because very good, well-meaning people mixed with alcohol is a very, 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 it's a spiritually deadly mix. So the Gemara says a person sees Sota b'kalkula, person sees, right, a Sota, so ultimately Yazir Atzma min hayayin, which tells you something amazing. Sometimes in life, you have to engage in extreme behavior for a little bit in order for the pendulum to swing back and settle back in the realm of normalcy. So the idea, the one who calls Nazir a chote, it's extreme. But sometimes I will say you have to be extreme for a little bit, in order to come back and quote unquote be normal, right? The best word is normal. Everybody likes to be normal. Of course, who's normal is of course very subjective. But lamaisa, sometimes you have to engage in extreme behaviors in order to settle back somewhere in the realm of normalcy. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheshes, Hai bar beirav diyase b'tanisa lechol kalba l'sherusei. So Rav Sheshes says, if the Talmud Chacham goes ahead and fasts, it's as if a dog has eaten his portion. And I will say, what does that mean? Look at Rashi. Sherusei sudasa kalba lechol sudasa l'kach hamisana inamol. I will say the idea being over here, Shesha says, it is not a good idea for a Talmud Chacham to fast. And if he fasts, we don't give him any credit for that fast. Rather, it's as if a dog ate his. What's the pshat of what we're going to see? This is part of a greater theme that halacha l'maisa, Talmud Chacham has to be very careful about taking on additional fast, because if the fast is going to come at the expense of his spiritual activity, and his learning is going to suffer, and his davening is going to suffer, then it's what's called yatsa scharo behefsedo. often again, more is lost than is gained. Amr Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Ein Taanis Sibur b'Bavel, Ela Tisha B'Av Bilvad. There are no communal fast days in Bavel except Tisha B'Av. Except Tisha B'Av. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Ein Taanis Sibur b'Bavel, Le'inyan Yisurei Chumrei Taanis. Rabbi Yirmiyah will say, Sheino Gam okay. So Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying over here is, the concept of a Taanis Tzibur, a public fast day with all of its restrictions, only applies in Bavel in which date? Only on Tisha B'Av. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amrei Shlakish, Ein Talmud Chacham Rashi Leishe B'Taanis, Mepnei Shememait B'Melech Shayim. So here it's more explicit. Rabbi Abba says, Rabbi Shlakish, a Talmud Chacham should not go ahead and fast. Rabbi say this is referring to voluntary fast days. Talmud Chacham should not engage in voluntary fasting. Why? Because ultimately, again, it diminishes his meleches shamayim. It diminishes his service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we'll say, so I just want to point out, so first of all, in general, you see this hashkafic machlokes about how we view these voluntary fast days, and in general, how we view these additional forms of personalistic privation. Are they viewed as pious acts? Are they viewed actually as deconstructive or destructive acts? That's a fundamental hashkafic machlokes. Now we'll say, what you also see from this last piece is, we'll say, all of us have an obligation to strive to be Talmidei Chachamim. And all of us have an obligation to strive to be pious individuals. So Shlakish says that a Talmud Chacham shouldn't fast. Why? Because it takes away from his ability to engage in spiritual service. Rabbi say, what an incredible musr in life. That every single day before I engage in a particular activity, I have to ask myself one simple question, which is, does this enhance my ruchnius or does it detract from my ruchnius? Right, the same way that Talmud Chacham, don't fast. But fasting is good. No, for you it's not good. Because for you, you have an obligation to engage in your Yirah Shamayim, in your Tefillah, in your Avodah, and anything that derails, that is not good. Rabbi said the same thing is true for anything in life. Again, it's hard for us to reach this level, but it's something we have to strive for, to be the kind of people that before I do something, I'm about to do something, there's one simple question. Help my ruchnius, detract my ruchnius. And by the way, the scary part is everything falls into one of those two categories. There is nothing that is tarif, right? There's nothing that's neutral. Either it enhances or detracts. If it enhances, go for it. If it detracts, sometimes I have to find the koach to pass. The Gemara goes weiter. So also remember again, on the first set of fast days, ultimately, again, you're allowed to eat the night before. So Amr Rabbi Zira, Amr Rav Huna, Yochid shekiv alav Taanis, afilu achal v'shas akal alayla, l'machrahu mispalel tfilas Taanis. So Rav Huna says as follows: if an individual accepted upon himself a fast day, so the halacha is he's permitted to go ahead and eat and drink the entire night before. So we'll say, remember again, we pointed this out in the Mishnah, even though again, one would have thought that halacha l'maisa, the fast day begins at the beginning of the calendar day, which is the night before. It turns out that fast days actually begin the morning of. So even if he ate and drank the entire night, the next day the fast begins and he davens anenu. That's what it means when it says mispalo tfilas Taanis. It means he ultimately again goes ahead and engages in anenu. But we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with the other part of this case. Okay, see, I guess it's destined for us to start the daf at 5:45. All right, so we'll pick up over here tomorrow. I don't know. Maybe we'll stay tuned for the schedule. We'll see what happens. We'll pick up with this next case tomorrow. We'll say also just a reminder: Steve Galaskov is sitting shiva in his home 7301 Park Heights. It's Ingram Manor, which is the apartment buildings literally right behind the shul on Park Heights. If you could help make the minyan there, it would be much appreciated. They are starting Shachris at 6:50 a.m. in 5 minutes from now. And Mir Hashem, it's apartment 2. You just have to buzz at the door and he'll buzz you. 202, but he'll buzz you in. Thank you, anyone who can help make the minyan.